Terran Union heavy cruiser, Roanoke, had spent the last 6 months raiding Nalek's supply lines in the Flores sector. They were finally returning to Terran space for some much-needed refit and some R&R. But first, they were stopping at the Battery space station orbiting MSAR-4. She would be meeting a Terran Union squadron to escort her prizes back to the Cooster system. 4 freighters, a massive ore hauler, and a damaged Nalex corvette that answered a distress call sooner than expected. The Roanoke was one of the new Grenville-class heavy cruisers, faster and more heavily armed than the other heavy cruiser classes operating as part of a Terran Union fleet. They were designed as solo raiders, able to operate deep in enemy space, raiding enemy supply lines and facilities. At 500 meters long and painted black as night, she was very intimidating to see on visual screens and even more so at close range. Her Carconi, chromium, cobalt, and nickel hull was covered in 12 malars of ablative armor covered in a black laser-resistant material able to reduce the effectiveness of enemy sensors and target locks. Captain Joseph Kral had been handpicked to command the Roanoke when she came into service 18 months ago. He was a popular officer with 20 years of combat experience on just about every ship in the Terran Union's Navy. He'd also provided technical assistance during its design phase, so his familiarity with the ship made him the best choice for putting the ship through her paces. This would be the very first voyage behind enemy lines as a raider. And Captain Kral was very good at approaching that line in the sand without going over it. Several centuries earlier, he'd have been a privateer sailing the oceans on Earth. This even led to the revival of the old pirate movies of the 20th century, but Captain Kral preferred likening it to the submarine warfare of the first half of the 20th century. That didn't stop his crew from giving him a robot parrot. And if you call him out on him walking around with it on his shoulder, he'll claim he was just humoring the crew. Captain Kral was relieved to see the Terran squadron had arrived before him and ordered his little fleet to dock. It would be good to be able to get off the ship and move around without weapons. As Captain Kral exited the ship, he was surprised to see Commodore Allen waiting for him. It had been several years since he last saw his friend in previous XO. Taking his prerogative as a captain, he skipped the formalities, shook hands, and gave Commodore Allen a friendly slap on the back. "Mike, what the hell are you doing here? This escort job is for a lieutenant to do," he asked. Captain Kral took a glance back to his ship and wasn't surprised to see his current XO, Lieutenant Commander Nana Ricci, had the resupply well in hand. With a big grin, Captain Kral said, "Let me see to my guests and we can see if we can scandalize the ratings like we used to." Captain Kral approached the waiting station manager. The Battery bowed in the formal greeting of her people. Not having the tentacles needed to return the bow, he just saluted her. "Greetings, Ananu of the Battery. We request the use of your services," he replied, finishing the ritual greeting. "I see you returned successful in your raiding," Ananu said. "How many bunks will you need?" Unsurprised that the Battery knew his mission, he replied, 72 bunks with 3 more for your med bay, if you have the room." One of the most important functions provided by the Battery was allowing for the return of captives taken in raids. This helped to keep things calmer by freely releasing captives to limit the amount of bad blood created during the raids and conflicts. Crates of supplies, ammo, missiles, and the various other things needed to keep the ship functioning were being transferred from the smaller Terran ships. With her weapon complement being only slightly smaller than a battleship, she could go through a lot of ammunition. Even without being in serious combat, he liked to run frequent gunnery drills. Some captains would just let their tactical computers handle operating the weapon systems and just have the gunnery crews handle reloads. But some hard lessons taught him that having the gunnery crews able to take direct control, as needed, was essential. He preferred to use up as much ammunition as needed during training to save lives later in combat. Seeing everything in hand, he walked back to join his friend for a drink. They caught up on the doings of old friends and Mike's family, toasts to fallen comrades, and eventually to the Roanoke. "How did she operate on her first long-range mission?" Mike asked. Taking a moment to organize his thoughts, Captain Kral took a sip of his drink. "She handled better than expected. The new engine behaved itself, surprising for being just off the drawing board. The Baxters were damn efficient. taking another sip before continuing. We didn't use the torpedoes or the turreted railguns in combat, but the rest performed as expected. That corvette didn't stand a chance, so we didn't get a full test of all the combat systems. Going by the number of munitions I brought with me, you'd think I was resupplying a battleship, Mike joked. Just about, Captain Crowell chuckled. During the design phase, I had to argue for such an increase of armament. It seemed to take forever for them to get it through their thick skulls that we'd be out there all alone and couldn't call for reinforcements. So I convinced them to put the 2 particle beam systems in the bow of the ship and give me the 4 torpedo tubes. They had no problem with the pair at the bow, but they couldn't figure out why I wanted a pair aft. I swear, I thought about launching them out of a tube. At least they were starting to get it when I upgunned the turrets to carry 2 large railguns. They did get upset at wanting to put on a turret in the middle of the ventral side, but were relieved I left the other turret on the dorsal side ahead of the command structures. Commodore Allen asked. From the glimpse I got as you docked, it looked like you doubled the usual weapon systems. She still has them 10 secondary batteries, but I went with dual medium railguns for them. Captain Crowell replied. I put 4 of the quad-mounted autocannons on each side of the ship. Or it should let us save wear and tear on the railguns when we catch unarmed ships or against incoming fighters. I understand, and it also saves on missiles, which with 4 heavy and 8 medium is a lot of missiles to carry. Commodore Allen replied. I've also heard you were running tests on a more powerful deflector array to do more than just protect against radiation and small debris, like maybe actual shields that would work on anything smaller than a battleship? Yeah, but not with any success, Captain Crowell answered. Anytime we tried to go past the standard low-power output, it played hell with our sensors. It was at that moment when Captain Crowell's wrist communicator beeped for his attention. The sound of Lieutenant Commander Ricci's voice came through the speaker. Priority message from the bridge captain. Sensor buoy reports large Nalex fleet dropping out of FTL 2 million kilometer out, Ricci reported. Ricci hesitated for a moment before answering. 37 ships with more arriving every couple of minutes. Commodore Allen swore. Captain Crowell looked at his friend. How long until you get your crews and get out of here? Commodore Allen thought for a moment. Maybe 20 minutes at the minimum. Captain Crowell muttered to himself. They'll be here before that. Both men got up, signaled to any of their personnel in the bar, and started out the door. I'll buy you the time, but I'll need to undock as soon as I get aboard my ship. Maybe I can catch them off guard. Captain Crowell. Commodore Allen replied, That's a suicide mission. There are too many for one ship to handle. Yeah, I know, old friend, but if I don't, then we all die. Captain Crowell explained, Do me a favor. I'm going to send you my non-essential personnel. Take them and those still on the station with you. Get them home. After a final salute, both men parted ways to reach their ship. As Captain Crowell jogged down the docking bay, he sent orders for Ricci to send all non-essential personnel to Commodore Allen and asked if they had sufficient hands to man all combat stations. Ricci's reply reassured him, Aye, sir. Most of the crew on the station are from the second watch, and the few people from the first watch are non-essential. Be ready to launch as soon as I get aboard, he ordered. He passed several members of his crew, en route to join Commodore Allen. He stopped to return their salute. At the disappointed look in their eyes, he told them, I know you don't want to leave the ship, but the Commodore needs some real sailors to get out on time. You know how those logistic guys are. They'll get lost trying to find their own bridge. That look reassured them, and after a final salute, they headed down the dock to join Commodore Allen. Captain Crowell reached the cargo ramp and started up it, calling Ricci and telling her to shove off and he'd be on the bridge shortly. He sprinted down the corridor, leaping over the lower lips of the vacuum-tight doors. Captain on the bridge, rang out from one of the bridge techs. Aside from the guards and his XO, the rest of the bridge crew kept working, nodding his approval at their knowing when to discard ceremony for action. He walked over toward his console before speaking. What do we have, Lieutenant Commander? Turning to face him, Captain Crowell could see just how worried she was. Current count is 48 ships. Touching the console's keys to bring up a list of ships before continuing, 18 capital ships and a mix of subcaps, still trying to ID them. They're waiting for something or someone, Captain Krall answered the unasked question. How many crew did we leave behind? 641, sir, the XO replied. To helm, are we clear of the station's shielding? Almost, sir, the helmsman answered. Turning to another tech, he said, sound battle stations. What class are they? Lit Commander Ricci asked. After looking at her monitor again, the tech replied, one heavy cruiser and something much bigger, waiting for the computer to ID it. Captain Krall moved to look over the tech's shoulder before standing up and facing his XO. Fleet command ship, he informed the tech and his XO. Lieutenant Commander Ricci replied, what the hell is one doing out here? Bringing up the sensor information to his console, Captain Krall pointed at the enemy fleet. They haven't begun to deploy into battle formation yet. That could be our chance, raising his head to look at his XO. If we jump now, we can land close and surprise them. After we land, we drive into the center of their formation and head for that big bastard. He explained. But sir, we haven't fully tested the jump drive, the XO exclaimed. No time like the present, Captain Krall joked. We'll let the railguns and autocannon crews pick targets of opportunity, while we engage the command ship with our particle cannons, heavy railguns, and torpedoes, he stated. What about its point defense system? Won't it pick off the torps? The XO asked. We're going to launch all the hammerheads at it. It should overwhelm the system and let the torps through. He answered before continuing. I'm going to save the heavy missiles for now. You'll need to calculate the launch time of the hammerheads to hit the point defense system as close to the time for the torpedoes to sneak through. He ordered, but not so far they take out the hammerheads too soon and let them hit the torps, but not so close they set them off either. Exchanging salutes, Ricci simply replied, Aye, sir, and started for the hatch. Just before stepping through, she turned and said, Good luck, sir. One of his communication techs spoke up. They need 10 more minutes. Captain Krall turned to comms tech and ordered, Intraship comms, if you please, ensign. Aye, sir, the tech replied before turning to his console and speaking into the mic. Now hear this. Message from the captain. I'm sure you've heard scuttlebutt about the situation, but here it is. We are facing a superior force numbering 49 ships, and we need to give the Commodore's squadron time to go to FTL and get the hell out of here. He paused before continuing. The plan is to mix it up with the enemy at close range. They aren't in battle formation yet, so we can hurt them. Good luck, and let's make them regret fucking with the Roanoke. The sounds of cheers came back over the speakers. Helm, are we clear of the station shielding? The captain asked. At the affirmative given by the helmsman, he just nodded. Touching a button on his console, he asked, Are you in place, XO? Aye, sir, the lieutenant commander replied. As soon as we land, be ready to open up with the dual and quad mounts, he ordered. The XO replied with an affirmative. Helm at my command. Jump between 25-50 kilometers to the starboard of the fleet. Oh, shit, exclaimed the helmsman and steered to avoid it. Captain Krall hit a moment of panic with a joke. Someone make note that the jump drive targeting system needs work. His joke brought a chuckle from his crew and got them back to focus on the taste. There was nothing to see or hear from the massive volleys of the secondary batteries coming to life, but he knew the gun crews were already raining devastation on enemy warships. Helm, hard to port, he ordered, not tearing his view away from the main view screen. Captain Krall looked at his console at the images sent to the bridge from the various gun cameras. He could see the flashes of light from projectiles hitting their shields. He watched as other high-velocity projectiles punched through their hulls. He could just make out the impact of the explosive-tipped slugs fired by the autocannons. Captain Krall turned back to the main view screen. Hard to starboard. One capital ship was dead in space with another missing its bow. His finger smashed down on the console button. XO, launch torpedoes. Take the gloves off the main batteries. Drop the hammer. Multiple small explosions let him know the point defense systems were taking on the hammerheads. And a moment later, A pair of massive explosions told him the nuclear-tipped torpedoes had hit their target. "Captain, the Commodore's squadron has escaped," one of his techs announced. "Distance to command ship?" he asked. "Thank you," he returned. Doing the math in his head, he had just over 1,300 combat effective, and 482 of those were his Marines. The other 18 were left behind. After thinking a moment, "Helm, same course as before, but since we can't go to FTL, circle to the aft of the command ship and lessen the incoming fire for the moment." Looking over to the comms tech, "Get me the chief engineer on the horn." Tapping the switch on the console, he called down to Tactical. "XO, I'm taking us around to the aft of the command ship and play peekaboo. We'll pass on her port side, and I want a broadside from all batteries that can hit it and launch half the Shrikes we have left at it. After we get to their rear, target enemy aft batteries, I want them all hunks of twisted metal," Captain Kral ordered. "Aye, sir," Lieutenant Commander Ricci replied. "Ammo count update, sir." "Only the 2 forward tubes are loaded, aft tubes empty, railgun and autocannon are down to 30%. Dorsal turret is at 10%, but they are working on transferring surviving ammo from the ventral turret. We can launch 4 more full racks of Shrikes and 5+ hammerheads," she finished. "Captain, chief engineer on the line," a tech relayed. I need you to place charges on the computer core, all the experimental equipment, engines, and fire suppression control. If we go down, I don't want them getting a damn thing but blood and pain." Captain Kral turned back to watch as the Roanoke passed the command ship to port. He watched as massive explosions rippled across the enemy flank and dorsal surface. They were too close for the point defense to pick off the majority of the Shrikes. As the Roanoke got behind and slightly below the enemy command ship, she slowed and allowed her surviving batteries to silence the command ship's aft batteries. Captain Kral called down to Tactical. "XO, fire half our remaining hammerheads into her engines." "Affirmative," replied the XO. Captain Kral watched as the hammerheads impacted the command ship's engines and saw the thrust nozzles dim as the engines went offline. The enemy batteries stopped firing and she began to drift. "Helm, get us 500 km from the command ship and line up to fire our last 2 avalanche torpedoes," Captain Kral ordered. "Aye, sir, 500 km bow towards the enemy," the helmsman repeated. The captain called down to Tactical. "Nana, we're positioning the ship to line up the front tubes and we're going to kill that bastard. Stay on the line and fire on my order." "Aye, sir, we're ready," the XO answered. Captain Kral watched, and as soon as he got the angle he wanted, "Fire torpedoes," he commanded. The whole bridge crew watched and waited for the impact. Both torpedoes struck amidships and tore massive holes in the hull. As they watched, lines of explosions traveled across the hull and began to rip the ship in half. The bridge crew let out a yell, and the rest of the ship after the captain had the information broadcast over the intercom. "Helm, get us the hell out of here. Maybe we can outrun the bigger ships and buy time to fix the FTL," Captain Kral ordered. But before the helmsman could act, there was a massive jolt. "What the hell?" he yelled. A tech answered. "We were rammed by a Nalex cruiser and several smaller ships are closing in." "Target those pods," Captain Kral ordered. But he didn't need to say it. His gunnery crews were on it. Here and there, a brief flash of light marked the destruction of a pod. "XO, fire all remaining missiles. Pick your targets," he commanded. "All batteries, open fire." He left the TACnet open to track the status of the enemy boarding parties. He listened to the cacophony of noises coming over the TACnet. "Security Team Alpha to Section 7, Level 3. Bravo Team Section 2, Level 1. Charlie Team Section 12, Level 5, the Commander Ricci ordered. "There's too many. Fall back to Position 2. An unidentified voice ordered. "Theta Team down, a handful of Nalex heading for engineering," a panicked voice exclaimed. And dozens of others just like it, always with the sound of combat in the background. "Captain, more breaching pods en route," a tech exclaimed. "Get me the chief engineer," the captain ordered. At the chief engineer's response, he ordered, "Detonate all sabotage charges, except the main computer. Set that one on a manual trigger at my console with a 20-minute timer as a backup. and then set the reactors to overload. We're not going to hold the ship much longer. And set a charge to breach the hull and decompress engineering as soon as you are clear. Turning to his bridge crew, give the order to abandon ship. Have all the pods head for the station. The captain called tactical. Latour Commander Ricci, all hands abandon ship. Get as many of them home as you can. Transfer all fire controls to my station and get the hell out of here. The honor is all mine. You are going to make an excellent captain. Goodbye, my friend. Captain Krall finished. His bridge crew tried to convince him to go with them, but he declined and ordered security to get them into the escape pods. He was dismayed at how few pods had left the ship and regretted so many young lives had been cut short. As he saw the last pod clear the battlefield, he sat back for a moment and then triggered the charge on the main computer. He wondered if it would work, but a huge rumble, a bright flash, interrupted, and the long career of Captain Krall was finally over.
If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.